Baie hartlik welkom by hierdie webinar van die Skoleondersteuningsentrum aangebied deur die VAW, die Vereniging van Wiskundeonderwysers. En dames en here, ons gesels oor 'n baie belangrike onderwerp, naamlik die stand van wiskunde, en spesifiek was die opskrif gewees vir vandag, bekommerd oor jou skool se wiskunde-prestasie. En ja, dit is seker 'n baie aktuele vraag. Want as jy betrokke is by skole en as jy betrokke is by wiskunde onderrig, dan staan mens verseker altyd voor uitdagende tye. En mens moet absolute wysheid hê om die regte dinge te doen in wiskunde. En alhoewel ons in 'n moderne era en tye lewe, dames en here, het ons nog lank nie die wiskunde dinge volmaak reg gekry nie. En vanmiddag se webinar is die doel daarvan om te gaan kyk na nuwe maniere en watter plekke ons kan aandag gee om die wiskundeprestasie in ons klas en ons skole te verbeter, met die uitsluitlike doel dat elke kind sy maksimum potensiaal moet kan realiseer. So ons het 'n baie interessante program vanmiddag. Ons het sprekers en aanbieders uit die Weskaap uit. Ons het van Reflective Learning het ons vir Jean Pelter en Matthew Rockiel. Jy sien hulle daar, iets vir Greta Langenhoven van Stellenbosch af. En hier in ons eie kantore het ons vir Marike Bellingham, die hoof van ons Vereniging van Afrikaanse Wiskundeonderwysers. So welcome gentlemen, Eugene and Matthew. Baie welkom Greta. Ons gaan nou met julle gesels. Ons gaan intussen net die bal in die rol kry om bietjie te vertel van wat sê die SOS, wat is die stand van wiskunde in hierdie land. Dames en here, my wense is dat hierdie 'n verrykende webinar sal wees wat vir u nuwe idees en gedagtes losmaak en weer nuut gaan laat dink oor die kinders wat in die wiskunde klas sit. So kom ons kyk hoe die dag verloop en ons vra die Here se seën op hierdie webinar. Nogmaals hartlik welkom aan almal. Ek gaan begin met Marike Bellingham. Marike is die hoof van die Vereniging van Afrikaanse Wiskundeonderwysers van die SOS. En ons het onlangs gaan kyk na die stand van wiskunde in die land. So ons wil 'n bietjie vir u inligting gee. So welkom Marike. En vertel ons gou 'n prentjie van dit wat die SOS kan raak sien. Wat is die huidige stand van wiskunde in Suid-Afrikaanse skole?
Goeiemôre julle. Voordat ek daarmee gaan begin, gaan ek net eers daarom sê, wat is die VAW en wat doen ons? So ons is alles vir Afrikaanse onderrig. Ons is nie teen enige ander taal nie, maar ons passie lê in wiskunde en veral spesifiek in Afrikaans. En soos jy goed genoem het ons gaan kyk, ons het gaan navorsing doen oor wat is die onderwysers se gevoel rondom graad 8 wiskunde. En ek gaan my skerm met julle deel, so die huidige stand van wiskunde, en hier het ek bietjie breër gaan kyk. Ek het eers ons matriekverslag gaan kyk, so ons het jaarliks vat ons die matriek uitslae en ons stel 'n verslag saam van ons matriek spesifiek in Afrikaanse skole, het ek gaan kyk spesifiek na die wiskunde. So hoewel daar in 2021 aansienlik meer wiskundekandidaate was, maar net omdat die groep groter was, het die groep 301 meer onderskeidings opgelewer. Maar as jy gaan kyk hoe groot die groep is, was dit eintlik 'n stagnering van die hoeveelheid onderskeidings wat opgelewer is, en dit dui daarop dat daar groot ruimte vir verbetering is, veral in die kandidate se basiese vaardighede en begrippe, en dan ten einde die toepassing van hoër denke en veral om hulle kennis van wiskunde dan te verdiep. So vanaf 2018 dra al die vakke mos dieselfde gewig vir B-graad toelatings. So dit motiveer amper ons kinders om nie meer wiskunde te vat nie, maar eerder vir 'n vak te gaan soos byvoorbeeld wiskunde geletterdheid. So dit is vir ons 'n groot kommer, want hulle werk nie van die begin af hard om te weet daar is 'n einddoel nie, want hulle weet hulle kan 'n ander vak vat en dit gaan dieselfde gewig dra vir hulle B-graad toelating. Ons GSE is ons gestandaardiseerde eksamen wat ons jaarliks skryf. Dit is van graad 4 tot graad 11. So dit is 'n interne eksamen en wat nogal vir my kommerwekkend was van 2021 se statistieke was dat die gemiddelde van graad 4 tot graad 9 met 14,2% geval het. So ek dink dit sê verskriklik baie vir ons van ons stand van wiskunde. En dan spesifiek in die ondersoek wat ons met die graad 8 onderwysers gehad het, kan ons sien dat die lede het uitgebrei en hulle het gesê, byna 1/3 van die lede het gesê dat 29% het aangedui dat leerders se persentasie met meer as 10% gedaal het en 41% dat die leerders se gemiddeld met 5 tot 10% gedaal het. So ek dink dit is vir ons baie duidelik dat ons onderwysers baie bekommerd is oor ons stand van wiskunde. Ons het verder gegaan in die ondersoek en ons het gaan kyk na die graad 8 se areas en ons het spesifieke areas gaan identifiseer en dan gaan die grafiek daar vir julle opsit en ek dink jy kan met die eerste oogopslag sien dat dit ons algebraïese vergelykings en uitdrukkings is. Dit is ons eksponente, gewone breuke en negatiewe heelgetalle. Nou as jy gaan kyk, daar is dan ons 4 onderwerpe wat leerders vir die eerste keer mee kennis maak in graad 7. So dit moet reeds vasgelê word, die basiese kennis in graad 7, sodat hulle kan bou in graad 8. En ek dink dit is 'n baie groot kommer. Die enigste uitskieter daar vir my is gewone breuke. Gewone breuke is nie net 'n uitdaging in Suid-Afrika nie of landwyd nie, maar dis 'n wêreldwye uitdaging. En ek wil nie te veel ingaan oor hoekom sukkel ons kinders met wiskunde nie en hoekom is hierdie spesifieke onderwerpe vir ons kinders moeilik nie. Hulle sal later met hulle meer daaroor uitbrei, maar wat vir my nog kommerwekkend is die manier van onderrig. Jerome Brunner het in sy konstruktivistiese teorie verduidelik, daar moet sekere stappe gevolg word om van konkreet na semi-konkreet na abstrakt beweeg word om 'n totale begrip van 'n onderwerp te vestig. En ek dink dit ontbreek verseker baie in ons skoolstelsel. Die mees effektiewe manier is om te ontdek, eerder as deur 'n onderwyser gevertel te word. Leerders in die grondslagfase leer die beste konkreet en die oorgang na semi-konkreet is reeds 'n uitdaging vir die intermediêre fase leerder in graad 4. En soos ek vir jou vroeër genoem het, dat die gemiddeld het met 14,2% afgeneem van graad 4 af na graad 9 vir ons GSE gemiddeld. So die oorgang van semi-konkreet na abstrakt blyk nog meer uitdagend te wees, omdat die kernboustene ontbreek en met hulle gaan later baie meer praat oor daai spesifieke boustene in daai woord. Leerders se kennis en vaardighede moet eerder aan die begin van 'n fase gemeet word, om oor die beskikbare tyd te gebruik, om konsepte ouderdomsgepas aan te spreek, eerder as te krisisbestuur. En ja, alhoewel ons nou moet krisis bestuur, moes ons al vroeër ingegryp het. Maar kom ons leer uit ons eerder uit ons foute en ons kyk hoe kan ons op die regte manier voorheen beweeg. Sodoende sal die gapings in wiskunde ook verminder. En dan dink ek 'n baie groot uitdaging vir ons is ons kurrikulum se voorgeskrewe tyd is baie beperk en oorlaai met al die inhoud.
Dankie Marike. So ons sien en besef weer eens dat ons stand van wiskunde is nie gesond nie. Ons kan nie daarmee tevrede wees nie. Ons kan sien uit daardie grafiek wat nog op die skerm is en mens kan dit sekerlik afbreek na die laerskole ook en ander grade toe ook, maar dit gee vir jou 'n idee, daar's duidelike sekere plekke en sekere areas waarmee ons die kinders die meeste sukkel. Nou Marike, wat gaan die SOS probeer doen om hierdie probleem aan te spreek, voordat ons kom by die gene van die reflective learning?
Ja, so Hugo, ons kan ongelukkig nie al die oplossings bied nie en al die probleme oplos nie. Ons wens ons kan, maar ons fokus is op die kritiese punte om die onmiddellike uitdagings aan te spreek, maar ook dat dit 'n blywende impak sal los en 'n blywende verskil sal maak. So ons het hulpbronne beskikbaar en wat nuut is aan 2022 is, dit word selfs die werkkaarte word volgens Bloem se taksonomie geontleed. So dit is meer diferensieerbaar, sodat jy jou kinders kan help wat sukkel dan met hulle boustene. Ons bied ook landwyd opleiding. Ons is volgende week in Mpumalanga. Julle kan gerus gaan kyk op ons webtuiste waar ons ook al is, maar ons tree die land op om te hoop dat ons 'n verskil kan maak in die onderwyser en die onderwyser kan bemagtig om dit makliker te maak vir die kind. So ons fokus hier op al die seer uit assessering uit wat nog 'n baie moeilike onderwerp is en 'n seer onderwerp is, maar ons raak hom definitief aan. Dan bied ons ook webinare. Johan Kokemoer bied die 13de Oktober vir ons 'n webinar aan oor wiskunde se spelreëls. En ons is so geneig om rympies te leer uit ons kop uit, maar hoekom nie rympies nie? Dan het ons GSE. Ons is juist nou tans besig om die GSE te modereer van graad 4 tot graad 12. Dit is beskikbaar vir graad 11, sorry. Dit is beskikbaar vir wiskunde en wiskundige geletterdheid en dit is ook die enigste hulpbron wat ons dan vertaal na Engels toe. En dan bied ons ook seminare aan. Pam Harris, ek gaan vir julle die prentjie deel. Sy is 'n wiskunde dosent uit Amerika uit. Haar fokus is Maths is Figure Outable. So sy het nog alle ander uitkyk na wiskunde en hoe om dit vir elke kind toeganklik te maak. Sy is die 8de November hier in Centurion by Lariba Lodge en dan is ons in die Kaap in die Parel by Laerskool Kortrey. So julle is meer as welkom om daar ook by ons aan te sluit. So hier ons probeer van ons kant af soveel as moontlik doen. Dit is nie altyd moontlik om alles aan te spreek nie.
Ja, uiteraard het ons almal saam die verantwoordelikheid en dis hoekom u vanmiddag by die webinar is om saam te leer oor nuwe maniere. U het gesien van die GSE, die gestandaardiseerde eksamen van die SOS. Inligting is beskikbaar op ons webwerf skole.co.za. Gaan kyk daarvoor, gaan registreer daarvoor en is 'n goeie maatstaf om te bepaal wat is die stand van jou wiskunde in jou skool graad 4 tot graad 11. Want dit is 'n hoë kwaliteit vraestel gemodereer deur topeksaminators opgestel en hy's volgens die caps en daarna sal u presies weet wat die stand is en u kan daai punte net so gebruik vir die einde van die jaar se bevordering indien dit wil gebruik. Baie dankie Marijke Bellingham, die hoof van die VHW. Dames en here, as daar vrae is, ons sal die tydskamer dophou en dan sal sy onder andere van die vrae later beantwoord. Baie dankie aan jou. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to introduce Eugene Pelteret and Matthew Rockhill. They're from the company called Reflective Learning. So we've talked about it quite a few times about the mathematics in South Africa and what can be done. And they've got quite an excellent and very interesting program. And we thought it will be best to have a webinar this afternoon so that they can inform you what they're doing. They will also give an introduction on what they see as the stance of mathematics in the country, what is the quality and where's the shortcomings. So it's my privilege to introduce the CEO and co-founder of Reflective Learning, Eugene Pelteret, and also Matthew Rockhill. A little bit later, he's the head of growth. Welcome, Eugene, and you can continue.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for having us both. I think this is such a really important issue across education in South Africa, and especially given the last couple of years with COVID, something which we're really struggling with. And I think just as we sort of unpack what it is that we do as reflective learning, You know, I think the thing to always keep in mind, and this is what we are now seeing, is that we're not sitting in a place with no solution or nothing that we can do. We have an opportunity to tackle the problem that we see, and Marika outlined it so well in terms of what the feelings are of grade 8 teachers across the country. And so I'm going to be just sort of giving a little bit of an introduction to reflective learning and who we are and what we do. And then Matt is going to actually show you the tool that we use. And hopefully by the end of this, you see a sort of a good grasp on what we have actually been working on from a solution perspective to this issue of backlogs in maths for the last 5 years. Because obviously COVID has brought about very particular concerns and worries, but what we've seen is that actually this was an issue that started before COVID. And so hopefully by the end you actually feel like there's hope and there's something that we can do about it, because we've seen that it is possible for learners to improve and to catch up the gaps that we know that exist. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen as we get started. And so to give you a little bit of a background on reflective learning, I mean, we've been around in terms of an idea for the last 10 years, as a company for the last 5, and with a very, very specific goal. And that is actually to say, how do we support teachers to catch up these backlogs in students' understanding of maths? And as we go through it, you'll see just some of the learnings that we've picked up along the way. But the first place to start is I want to start not with the grade 8s. I want to start with what we often measure as the goal, and that is the matric results. And the interesting thing is not necessarily even the matric pass rates and so on, but it's actually what happens when students get into first year university. And what's very interesting is that UCT ran a study a few years ago asking that very question of, well, if you come in with a certain pass rate of matric, what happens in first year university? And the worrying thing that the universities are picking up is that a student can be getting an A, be getting 80%, you know, for matric maths, but actually on average sitting at a 47% in terms of their mark in maths 1. So, and with a third of those students actually failing first year university. Now, if we think around the careers they go on to, that can often hold students back from graduating and going on beyond. And Professor John Webb sort of said it in this sort of way. He said they get an A for matric, but the next year they discover that their A has not adequately prepared them for university maths. And this is a concerning thing for us when we look across the country as a whole. But it then gets us asking the question, well, why is this the case? Why is it that students can go through primary school, go through high school, and then actually find at the end of the day that they're not being able to be prepared for university? And there are really 2 main reasons that we see as reflective learning. And the first is what Marika was sharing from a teacher perspective, and what we've seen from a learner perspective as well, is that too many students fall behind during the course of primary school. And then when they enter grade 8, they're actually many years behind. So this is us pulling off data from somewhere around about 160,000 assessments that we've run across the country, and looking at the different topic areas of maths and what percentage of students are actually ready when they enter grade 8. And so numbers is a fair bit higher, sitting at 75%, and this is sitting in your quintile 5 schools. But then you look at something like fractions, and even in our kind of best schools in the country, only 38% of them of grade 8 are actually ready for high school. And that becomes a problem, because now in grade 8, you're sitting there as a teacher with a host of students sitting in front of you, and your job is to teach them building on that foundation. And this becomes really problematic. And when you go in and you look at what grade 9 is building off of with patterns in algebra, and only 2% of students are effectively ready for high school, you know, building off of the patterns in algebra work. And so that's one big problem, is these backlogs, the number of students that are actually ready for us to build off of these foundations. But there's a second issue that I think has cropped up over the last 10 or 15 years. And that is you know, when we look at in terms of pedagogically, how we build maths, how we teach maths, as reflective learning, we sort of see three phases. The first phase is that we build a deep and comprehensive understanding of a concept. So we need to be able to really understand, you know, what is it that somebody needs to learn, or a learner needs to understand. What is it that they need to be able to understand and have a really good grasp of that knowledge. They then move to a place of building speed and fluency and what we call automaticity, the ability to be able to do mental maths and be able to kind of move quickly and reliably through different parts of maths as kind of questions get asked of them. And the last phase is to actually be prepared for exams. So now I am looking at past papers, I'm looking at past tests, and I'm preparing myself for what is likely to come so that I can be able to demonstrate the knowledge that I have. But unfortunately, over the last 10 or 15 years, what's happened is that we, you know, speaking very generally across the country, is that we have generally left out phase one. You know, when we look at the way of you know, teaching as a question and answer based kind of methodology of, I'm going to fire you a question and here's step one to answer, step two, step three, step four, or even worse, you know what, let's just prepare you for past papers, but we've skipped the learning part that takes place. And unfortunately, what that ends up doing is it actually builds rote learning. And so when learners are able to give correct answers, but not really understand fully what they're doing, that's where we see that, you know, matric marks have escalated, haven't improved. But when you get into first year university, the lecturers aren't, you know, looking at, well, this is the way you would normally be tested. They're assuming that you have base knowledge on and an ability to apply it from there. And so these are the two big problems that we see as a country. And the question we always have to be asking ourselves is, how do we catch up these backlogs? And how do we ensure that the foundational knowledge, the real deep knowledge is in place before students progress through the grades? And that goes whether we're sitting in primary school and they're exiting into high school, or at the start of high school when we say, you know, we need to be able to assess students and be able to catch them where they're at. Because the thing that we've seen is that if you don't fill these gaps, they perpetuate all the way through to matric. And so this is the struggle that we see for teachers. And I'm going to speak in the high school context, but you can apply it to late primary school as well, is that this is a very, very difficult problem to solve. And this is the reason why, is that we have seen from the data that every student has a different set of gaps. Now, that may seem obvious. If you're a math teacher and you have a set of students in front of you at the beginning of grade 8, it's very obvious that different students are at different levels. But maybe what's not so obvious is how far back the problem goes, because everybody comes in with a different set of prior knowledge. But how do you know, well, this student needs help with this concept? And it's not just that concept, but it needs to go back 3 years or 6 years or all the way back to the beginning of primary school. We have seen that sometimes students miss a concept completely. They might be sitting in grade 8, but they're struggling with adding fractions going right back to grade 1. And this is a big problem. So you have every student sitting at a different level with a different set of gaps across all of these foundational concepts that we know need to be in place. The second problem is that teachers naturally have larger classes. So if you were working one-on-one, you'd very possibly be able to actually identify where the gaps are, give personalized remediation, go back and catch up students. But that's not the reality that we sit in. You know, with 20 or 30 or 40 students in a class, you know, you now have a problem with how do you do this across an entire class at the same time. And then, like I was saying, I mean, as high school teachers or even intermediate phase teachers, we're not necessarily trained to go all the way back to foundation phase to build up that understanding. We're assuming that students are coming in with a certain level of knowledge. And unfortunately, because of the hierarchical building of maths right from grade 1 all the way up to grade 12, we have to go back to rebuild the knowledge. We can't just leave a gap and assume that the learners will kind of fill it. We have to be able to go back. And that's you know, an impossible task when we're not actually trained to do that. Never mind the fact that the resources aren't really there. And so that's another part. If we think about, you know, the maths resources, whether they are, you know, physical textbooks, whether they are online software, they are typically grade-based. So in other words, I'm sitting in grade 8 and the work that, or the lessons that are being delivered to me, or the worksheets that I'm being given are sitting at a grade 8 level. But again, that's not where the problem sits. The problem sits somewhere in the last 7 years that we have to be able to go back and catch up. So reflective learning is not about actually delivering curriculum. We believe teachers are trained, they're well placed, they have the resources, you know what to do and how to do that. But the problem that teachers find is when I don't have the students at the right level, how do I go back and catch up? And so we are actually remedial focused in that sort of way. And then the last one, which is an obvious one, you know, for teachers, is that you're under so much pressure from a time perspective. How do I cover the curriculum that I'm supposed to be teaching? I'm being pulled forward in one direction, but I have to go back and remediate in another. And this kind of being pulled in two different directions is really difficult. And the time for this means that whatever solution is put in place, we have to be able to accelerate learning at the end of the day. So the interesting thing is we've used all of these points of learning to really guide us in terms of how we've developed a solution. And so we know that we need to be able to identify the learning need for every individual student, because everyone's gaps are different. We know that the actual content or the lessons that are given to students need to be tailored specifically for that learner, because otherwise if you're sitting, you know, being forced to teach to the middle, there's some learners that it's above where they're sitting. For others, it's seemingly boring and they check out. And then when there is something that they need, they have already kind of mentally are absent. And so it actually has to be tailored, you know, but looking back, like I was saying, potentially all the way back to grade 1, right? So it's not good enough for us to actually say, well, we have to go back to grade 7 or to grade 6. We actually potentially have to go all the way back. And we have to build right through the schooling. So we have to build in this very incremental manner all the way through. Like I was saying, I mean, we have to focus on building that core understanding first before we move on to fluency or exam preparation, so that we don't fall into the trap of, unfortunately, building, you know, rote learning. And then ultimately, this whole thing has to be something that is very sustainable for teachers, that is not a burden, but actually a tool which empowers everybody to be able to meet the need of the students. And so that is what we have been doing for the last 5 years, is really looking at all these key principles and saying, how do we build something that can meet the need? And so there's a very relevant question that teachers may ask, and that's to say, well, if I'm sitting in grade 8 and I'm struggling, or a learner is struggling, is that too late? Or is grade 10 too late? You know, when is the point where we actually have to say, sorry, I need to move on to somebody else? And the amazing thing that what we've seen is that it is possible for students to catch up as much as 4 years worth of understanding in just 12 months. It all has to do with, you know, how much time and, you know, along with obviously the teaching and learning approach and the content itself being tailored and all of that, it has to do with the amount of time that a student is effectively engaging with the right set of resources, the right material. So this is a gentleman who was part of the very first project of reflective learning. And Makoba was sitting in grade 10, but at a grade 6 level in terms of his competency for math. So he was effectively 4 years behind. And he went through a process of using the same methodology that reflective learning used. And now this is 10 years on, right? This is back in 2012. Today, he sits as a maths teacher who is actually teaching FET phase maths in, you know, two learners sitting in the same circuit and district that he grew up in. And all the way through, you know, he managed to catch up in that grade 10 year, the equivalent of 6 years actually in his own catch-up process. He then went on to excel with matric, get a ISASA bursary, and gone on from there. And that for us is the kind of model that we're trying to see happen across South Africa. Students catching up being released to then actually understand and be taught FET phase thereafter. And so this is what we've seen, is that students can catch up as much as 4 to 5 years of somewhere between 40 and 50 hours of focused contact time. And that's really important, is that obviously we all know students can be attending, sitting in our class, but if they're not focused on what they're doing, they're not going to pick up the knowledge. So it has to be focused time. But this 40 to 50 hours, whilst may sound a lot at the beginning, when you break it down into a program, it can be 30 minutes every weekday for 4 months, or it can be an hour per week for a school year, or it could be 45 minutes per week over 5 terms. Our goal is to say that actually, if we can pick up students towards the end of primary school, or let's call it the beginning of grade 8, by the end of grade 9, when students have to choose between core maths, maths literacy, technical maths, they have the foundations in place, and then more and more students can choose core maths. And that's actually our goal. So we kind of see the end of grade 9 as this really pivotal moment that we need to have caught up the foundations by then. And so what we have seen is that despite the students coming in potentially into high school being behind, it is very possible for them to catch up. And just to give a couple of examples, and then I'm going to pass on to Matt, who's going to take us through a demo of the program. This is an example of one of the schools that we work with, St. Anne, sitting in the KZN region. And they obviously sit at a very top end sort of level of students that are entering. The yellow over there shows the baseline. It shows the percentage of students that entered the school already at the level where they needed to be. And so that for numbers are slightly higher than normal, sitting at 85%. That is now sitting at almost 100%. So there's literally just one student that their grade 8 that hasn't got for numbers. And you can see similarly across the board, you know, of the percentage of students that have caught up to being exactly where they need to be. And that is our goal, is to bring everybody up to the minimum standard of having these foundations in place. And likewise, another school that we're working with is being Weinberg Boys, you know, where we have seen similarly, where by taking out time to focus on catch up, they're able to raise the base. And the patterns and algebra one that you see over there is because they chose not to focus on that, but they focus on each other topic of maths. And so if we can bring as many students up to that baseline of kind of foundational understanding, we then prepare them to choose core maths and actually build the foundation into grade 10 and beyond. So I know we'll have Greta, who will also share a little bit later in terms of her experience of reflective learning and working with it. But I'm now going to just stop sharing and hand over to Matt. And maybe just as a bridge, as he sort of starts sharing a screen, there are always two halves to our program in essence. There's what the learner will see and the learner app in effect that they log into, and then they go on their journey of identifying gaps and catching them up. And then there is the data component, which is all the teacher dashboard and what you get access to see where your students are at. And we'll go through both of those halves. Thanks, Matt.
Perfect. Thanks, Eugene. And thanks for everyone for listening. I'm just going to take you through the program. But before I start, I just wanted to reiterate something that Eugene was mentioning. As a former maths teacher myself, I can't forget that tension that you constantly find yourselves in being able to complete the curriculum, but also understanding that who you're teaching to doesn't actually have the ability to grasp and understand what you're saying. And I felt that personally as a teacher, and I'm sure you all felt it as well, particularly after COVID. And I think exactly what Eugene is saying, what we're trying to achieve by this tool and by this program is to make sure that when a learner is sitting in your class, that they have the expected level of understanding so that they can grasp and apply themselves to what you're teaching. Okay, so Eugene's laid a very solid foundation. So I'm going to go quickly through how we do that. So what we've done is we have gone through the CAPS curriculum, IEB, Cambridge, and a number of other international curricula. And we've looked at all the learning outcomes and the learning standards, and we've identified through the mathematics curricula up until the end of grade 9, end of the GET phase, certain foundational concepts that are very important that every learner understands, to be a well-rounded mathematician going into FET and into higher learning. And what we do with those concepts, so we've identified 81 of them, and what we do with those concepts is that we break them down into what we call a journey. And so a journey is effectively just a logical collection of these concepts, and they are placed into a specific order, and according to learning design and the pedagogy behind it, that helps learners understand them in the appropriate manner. So we have a journey for numbers, fractions, measurement, data literacy, problem solving, patterns in algebra, and of course, space and shape. And so what we do within each one of these journeys is we take the learner on a process of a self-guided process of identifying where their gaps are. And we do this through diagnostic assessment. And once we've determined what their gaps are, we then provide them with learning material that they can work through, which includes information, includes imagery, it includes worked examples, it includes quizzes, and a whole bunch of new things that are coming too. And we then provide them with that on a personalized basis. So we are providing them with the content that they need to know based on what they've been able to show mastery on in their assessment. We've then continually run them through a process of catch-up material and reassessment so that we can ensure that improvement is actually being made, because ultimately that's the goal. We want to ensure that impact in the classroom is definitely there, and so we want to check consistently, have they actually learned something? Have they improved their conceptual understanding? And then we proceed on to different levels of mastery, whereby they can function in the classroom and then also extend themselves on to a full and complete understanding of all the concepts on a journey-by-journey basis. There's also a number of other soft skills which we have built into the program, and I won't go into too much detail about those, but just to let you know and to make you aware that it's not just a program that is assessing and diagnosing problems. We're also working towards training the learners through the system to become what we would call a lifelong learner. We want them to develop these soft skills around pace and precision. Things like perseverance are all very important to the learning journey. And then we couple that with a positive and a growth mindset, which we are constantly pushing the learners towards. And then all underlying with the foundation of metacognition and becoming metacognitively active. You know, we want to ensure that the learners are equipped with the ability to understand everything that they know in terms of what they know right now, what they need to learn, and where they need to go along their journey to be able to take on any learning challenge as they go on. So while they are catching up their gaps in maths and catching up these backlogs, we're also providing them with the skills to become a lifelong learner and empower them to move through the rest of their high school and learning career as they go through it. To jump into the actual assessment itself, I'm going to look at the measurement journey, and you can see it's very interactive, it's very easy, sort of one click, and we're into the assessment. There's a whole bunch of instructions that need to, that we focus on to make sure that the learners are ready to understand and to do what's necessary. And so we try and alleviate things like anxiety and those sort of things by making sure that they are aware of what's happening and what is about to happen for them. So two of the primary rules that we sort of enforce while we are doing an assessment is that we don't want them to ask for help, and we don't want them to use a calculator, because we want to assess what they know. We need to find out where their actual knowledge is, not what the calculator can tell them, not what their teacher or their friend can tell them. We need to find out where they are, because everything that comes after this assessment is underpinned by the results of the assessment. And so we are ensuring that we are getting their understanding and not anything else. And that's why it's important to focus on these things here. The system is web-based, and it's continually saving itself. And so there's no time limit. And we also encourage the learners to take a pen and paper into the test, into the assessment, so that they can calculate and work through their examples as and when needed. So then we jump into the actual assessment itself. And so we're looking at a junior high school assessment. And what we're doing in this measurement example is that we're actually looking at questions that are pitched at different benchmarking levels. So for each concept in this journey, we are going to be asking questions at, in this case, a grade 3, a grade 6, and a grade 9 level as a bare minimum, to determine whether or not the learner can demonstrate mastery of this particular concept at the appropriate level. And then obviously, if they aren't able to identify mastery, then we know that there's an issue with that level of content. And so the algorithm in the background then understands that they need to learn this thing because they haven't been able to identify what it is. And so, we can select, obviously it's very simple. We can answer the questions by clicking. There's a I don't know button built in, which gets explained to the learners as well. And so we can select the answer that we think is appropriate and move on to the next question, and so on and so forth. And so we are being tested all the time at these benchmark levels. So the number of concepts that we have working through, each one of them is being asked at a different level, so that we can ensure that we get a very solid and very powerful picture of what a learner understands. And the whole purpose is not to provide them with a mark at the end of it so that they think, oh, well, I'm 80%, I'm fine. The purpose of this assessment is to determine what they know, purely for the sake of us being able to teach them what they don't know. And so we are looking at going through the questions, and it's obviously very interactive, and we try and answer. We have different methods of answering. So you see me click a few answers. You can see that I can type in some things, and so on and so forth. And so I go through the test, I go through the assessment, I answer the questions as I go through, and then I am, let me just skip through to the end, and which is obviously not recommended when we are doing an assessment. But you can see the degree of questioning gets more difficult as you go through it. That's obviously due to the benchmarking. And when I get to the end, I'm actually asked to submit. And so once I've submitted my assessment, this is where all the magic begins to happen. The algorithm works out where the level of the learner, what they know, what they don't know, where they need to go, and now immediately, instantly provides them with formative feedback. So the first thing that we will see here is that we've also built in a gamification process to the tool, because we want the learners to constantly be driven back to working and to engage with the program as much as possible. Because our data shows that as they engage with the program and as they begin to learn, then all the backlogs get caught up and they can function better in the classroom. And so the first part is being rewarded for doing or demonstrating positive learning behavior. And I'll talk a bit more about that later on. Then I get to go through my results and see how I did in my assessment. So obviously, having skipped through a whole bunch of questions, I've done poorly, but it shows me straight away what my mastery level is. Because I'm in the junior high phase in GET, I'm looking to push towards level 9. My current level is level 1. And so again, we're reinforcing the gamification element where I need to go from where I am currently to where I need to be at level 9, and I need to level up each time. On the teacher side of things, we can understand that these levels represent grades, but we've done it in such a manner as to not make the learner feel bad about what their understanding is. And so we can see their level of mastery, where they need to go, and then also out of the 11 concepts in the measurement journey, we can see how many of them they've actually mastered. In my case, unfortunately, I haven't been able to master any of them. And then I'm encouraged to keep going. So you can see everything is self-guided. We're taking the learner through this journey of identifying where their gaps are and then providing them with the material to catch up. I'm just going to jump over to one of the other journeys, let's say numbers, for example, just so that you can see something slightly different. And I'm going to show you what happens after the assessment. So once I've completed my assessment, I am prompted to continue the catch-up process. And so the first part of that journey is to actually see where I am in my journey. And so what I'm looking at here are all the concepts that I need to understand in the numbers journey. And you can see how they've been designed. You can see that they follow a certain order, a logical order. For example, we need to understand how to add before we can understand how to multiply, and so on and so forth. And so we follow this pathway of learning that is plotted personally for each learner as they work through the numbers, in this case, journey. So the ultimate goal here is to convert all of these red circles into green circles. So in my case, because I skip a lot in the demos, I have a lot of learning to do. And you can see that it's prompting me to go through into this first stage, which is counting numbers. And so I jump into counting numbers, and this is where sort of those soft skills that I spoke about in the beginning start to come into play. So we're going to look at a metacognitive component of what we're doing, where it's explaining the levels of the circle. So in the assessment, I mentioned benchmarking. And so we are looking at level 3, level 6, and level 9, which are the benchmarks for this assessment. And so what it's going to demonstrate to me is what is my current level of understanding at each of these levels. And then it shows me what it means in terms of the colors. So it gives me a quick little quiz. We know that this inner circle represents level 3, and it means that I haven't actually mastered this level yet. And all that means for us as learners is that I'm going to now be taught the content that for levels 1 to 3 so that I can catch up. I move on to the next one, which is the middle circle, which represents level 6 in this case. And it also, because it's red, I haven't mastered it yet. And then on the outside, it's level 9, and I also haven't mastered that yet in this case. Just for a point of reference, we also, for intermediate phase, we would change these benchmarking levels for their assessment. They don't do the full 81 concepts. They will only work through 53 of the concepts. And their benchmarking levels are at grade 1, grade 3, and grade 6. And so we don't obviously expect someone in grade 6 or grade 7 to understand grade 9 concepts. And then I move on to the catch-up material itself. So as you can see, the first thing on the left-hand side is the levels that I need to go through. And based on my assessment, because all 3 of my circles were red, I have to learn all of the grade 1 to 3 content. I have to learn the 4 to 6 content, and I have to learn the 7 to 9 content. So this is where the personalization comes in. If Eugene had done a similar assessment, his counting numbers concept, his journey would be different to mine, because he might have understood grade 1 to 3 and grade 4 to 6 for counting numbers, and maybe he only struggled with the 7 to 9. And so that's how, through technology, we are able to personalize this catch-up process to each individual learner. And we are only ever providing them with the learning material that they need based on their assessment, which is a very important and key component to understand. The other part, which is really important, which separates reflective learning from most of the other math software out there, is that we don't just provide material for the grade that you are currently in. We don't follow what we would call a horizontal approach, where if I'm a grade 9 learner, I have a few gaps in grade 9, and therefore I must do grade 9 lessons. We go back to the last point of secure understanding. And that's evident here based on my assessment in numbers. I didn't understand anything in this grade 1 to 3 range. And so now, because of that, the program is able to take me all the way back to grade 1, as Eugene mentioned, and bring me up to that level where I need to be. So there's a few benefits to this as well. You know, a lot of learners who are, by the time they get to grade 9 or the time they get to grade 8, struggling with maths, and they know that they are struggling with maths. So this is where they start to lose confidence. They start to gain anxiety or have certain stigmas towards the subject, i.e. I'm not a maths child, or I don't have the ability to do this. And the fact of the matter is every child has the ability to do it. It's the backlogs that are the primary cause of their struggle in the subject. And by us taking them back to their last point of understanding, we are able to build their confidence as they grow in these short micro wins as they learn new things. And so that's another unique aspect of what we are doing compared to other providers, that we can go all the way back to the last point. And because it's so targeted, the learners actually catch up so much faster than in traditional remediation mechanisms. So this is what the content then looks like. You can see, there's a lot of imagery. There are worked examples and things that the learners can go through. And then we have a question at the bottom of every page, which is just reinforcing the content, making sure that the learners are working through it, and reinforcing key components. And again, this is where our gamification comes in, is if they get the answer correct, they will earn some gems. I've actually done this before, so I didn't earn gems that time. But you get the idea of what they're working through. And so this is effectively how they will go through the system, how they will go through the content. For those that struggle with written comprehension, we also have this listen to the page button, which actually reads out the page to the learners, and it really does help them in terms of their oral comprehension to be able to understand what's going on in the content. So we don't have any issues with language as they work through the content. Then we have some other sections where we are exploring more, which expands on some of the ideas in each of the catch-up process. And this is an ability for the program to extend learners who may have now understood something. They can work through more things. And we also have inspirational stories, keeping them motivated, keeping them understanding the purpose of maths and how it can be applied to their life and the benefit that it's going to have to them. And finally, in these reflection sections, this is where we're actually testing their knowledge on a concept-by-concept basis at the appropriate level. And we do have some improvements coming to this section quite shortly, but effectively what it is a quiz that they can work through and understand and ensure that they've actually grasped everything that they were supposed to grasp. Then what we do is we follow this journey along the lines of going from numbers through to space and shape in the appropriate order, and we have the ability to guide the learners in this process, and we do that by what they can by awarding trophies. And so each journey has its own trophy that they can earn, and there's different levels of the trophy. So as I mentioned, when they earn their bronze trophy, that is a sufficient amount of knowledge to function at the appropriate grade level in the class. Then we move on to the extension part, where we can challenge them to get their silver trophy and their gold trophy so that they can move further in their understanding of a particular concept. But once they've earned the trophy, the next section unlocks and they can move on to fractions, and they can move on to measurement, and so on and so forth. And so what we are really talking about when Eugene mentioned the 40 to 50 hours, we wanted them to go through the system that guides them through the journey of working through their gaps in numbers through to space and shape to complete their understanding at the appropriate level. Then in terms of some of the fun things that we can have, we also look at what the learners can do with the gems that they've earned. And so you have the ability to build out your own little character, and you can buy different eyes and different accessories and all things that interest the learners to keep coming back. And so based on how you're learning and the positive learning you're demonstrating, you are able to buy different things and change different colors and so on and so forth for your own character. I haven't earned enough gems to buy anything yet, but you get the idea of how we're continually bringing learners back to the program so that they can earn more gems by learning, so that they can buy new accessories and buy new things for their little character. And then we can move on to just one other component, if I can get it to pop up. Not this time. Let me jump over to the dashboard. So this is now where we empower teachers. And so while the learners are going through the progress on going through the program through the self-guided manner, and the role of the teacher in that is to facilitate and to guide and to encourage, you are also equipped with all the data and all the information that you would need to understand exactly what's happening in each and every individual learner's learning process. And so we get to look at the data in a number of different manners, in two different ways. The first is looking at as a whole class, or as a whole cohort. So we can see their assessment progress. So in this particular class that we're looking at, each one of these bars represents an individual learner, and we can see that this particular learner is the only one who actually hasn't finished their assessment for the numbers journey. And I can jump over to the fractions journey, and I can see a different picture. It's again the same learner, he's a little bit behind, but you get the idea that you can see the progress and assess the progress of your learner. You can also then follow, as the class, you can follow their catch-up process. So the green bars here represent how many concepts they've already mastered in this particular journey. The yellow represents the numbers of concepts that they've covered by going through the catch-up material. And the red ones then represent what still needs to be done in terms of their work. And so this is how we can get information on encouragement and who needs more motivation, and following on to see what's happening. And then the last thing we can look at here is how the learners are actually improving. And so when we look at our improvements graph, this is what I find phenomenal as a former teacher, is the yellow bars here represent their initial baseline assessment for this particular journey. And so what you get access to look at your whole class is to see how they're improving from where they started to where they should be. And so everyone should be pushing towards level 9, but you can also see how different learners learn differently. And the data is very clear here. I mean, this particular learner went through the content and did a reassessment and gained 6 years of understanding the first time round, and then had to go through a bit more and managed to get up to the top. Whereas this learner did it in a bit more stepwise approach, but ultimately got to the end where they are at the same level of understanding. And so however the learners go through the content, they all end up in the same place, which is at the appropriate grade level for their existing classes. And then if I look at an individual learner, I can look at all the same things for each particular learner, but I get a bit more granular detail here. I can go, in terms of their assessment, and what we're looking at here is fractions, is I can go and look on a concept by concept basis exactly where the child is struggling and what level they are at, and so that we can start to understand why they aren't able to grasp what we're doing in the class. So this particular learner, for example, has mastered the concept of comparing decimals, but is really struggling with rounding decimals, and is actually at level 0 with basically no understanding of the concept. And you can see, you go through it concept by concept by concept, you can see exactly to a granular level exactly where your children are struggling. You can follow their individual progress in terms of what things they are working on. You can see their improvement, and you can also track how much they are engaging with the program on a week by week or day by day basis. Eugene, is there anything you would like me to add further?
Yeah, maybe just a couple of points, and I think some good questions have been raised that have been put in the chat, which I think would be good to answer, and then sort of hand over to Greta to share a little bit. But I think one of the interesting things that that we're doing. So we have got lots that are in the pipeline. So we're continually improving this program. And as you can see, it's a web browser that as you log in. So actually, you can be sitting on your cell phone, you can be sitting on your tablet, you can be sitting on your computer and be able to log in. You know, let's say I'm logging in at school because I have an opportunity to log in there. I then continue at home. And because it syncs up, you're able to actually do that. And so for a learner, it's something that goes along step by step. So there's some things that are in the pipeline as we speak that are currently being built out. We have fluency activities, which are little games that are going to test, you know, the learners at different levels. So the one over there you can see is sort of a bubble pop, what we call bubble pop, which is effectively, you know, them answering questions, and you have bubbles that kind of float down and they've got to answer them correctly before they kind of hit the bottom. And the one on the right hand side is, if you remember something like the 24 game that came on the cards, being able to use BODMAS to work out different combinations of 24. And so again, these sort of games are being built in that in the next, 3 weeks will be available. The trophies element, you'll see we've recently integrated. And then there's an interactive text component where as students are going through it, they have an opportunity to kind of read definitions. They'll be able to answer multiple choice kind of inputs as they go along. And the last one that we're also building in are more kind of evaluation type quizzes at the end of each kind of phase of catch up. And so hopefully through all of this, it's not a static experience for students. They're going through, they're always interacting with it. But very importantly, all the way through, is that we care very much about how much learning is going on. And so we've built it in such a way that it's the most impactful tool. And that's really a passion for us. So to answer some of the questions directly that have been put out, so I may just put one or two across the map. There's a question from Wani, just around looking at the data. How much data is this using? The great thing is we've built it incredibly data light. You'll notice that we've intentionally kind of steered away from video input, because especially over the course of COVID, over the last couple of years, as soon as everybody's trying to cram onto videos, it becomes a nightmare. So this is incredibly data light. To put into perspective, if you needed all of the catch up to all 9 years worth of catch up, you're probably looking at about 150 megs, right? And that's used over the course of months. And so we've been very careful in terms of building it very data light. Like I said, you can use a cell phone, a PC, or a tablet. It's mobile optimized, so you're able to kind of use different forms to get on. And in October, we're actually, there's a question from, there wasn't a name attached. There's a question around, can parents sign up students? In October, we're going to be launching it. So it is possible for parents to sign up, but we know what we always prefer to actually partner with schools, because we feel like we are the custodians of education. And so yes, whilst parents, you know, can guide students through, how much better is it actually if we're able to build through and into schools, empowering teachers to actually do it? That's our number one goal, ultimately. There was a question from Leora just around special needs. Can special needs students use this, those with dyslexia and the likes? Obviously, you'll see that there is, you know, text that is kind of built in. That's the way we keep it data light. But interesting enough, I mean, kind of unintentionally in truth, but we had actually met recently with a disability expert, and as she looked at it, she said this is one of the most accessible platforms, given the fact that there's also a little text-to-speech component that can read it out. She was quite impressed by that, and in truth, we weren't specifically aiming for that. We're aiming for learning deficits, not disabilities, but that's something which is nice to be able to know as well. And then there was a very practical question from AS around how do students, should they be completing this in their own time? Should it be facilitated by a teacher? We've seen through the data, and I'm sure your experience of if you were to give homework but not follow up on it, it doesn't tend to happen. So for us, it's always better if it's in a controlled and a managed and has somebody who is caring for it and for the students as they go through this process. So typically the best kind of case we've seen, or the best usage, is when there's class time that is allocated, say, right, we're going to focus on going to a lab or use our tablets or use our cell phones to log into reflective learning, let's say a period a week or whatever it is. But there's allocated time that is sitting within the school day for catch-up ultimately. And then the curriculum kind of happens concurrently. We do have some schools that say, you know what, we're going to place 2 or 3 periods a week because we just know how important the catch-up is. And it's going to help me as a teacher, because when they have caught up, then it's going to be easier to go from there. So like I was saying, ultimately, it's best within the schooling environment as opposed to kids just doing it at will at home. Then there was a very good question from Linky, just around, is this in Afrikaans and is this in English? And that actually brings us to a really important part of why we're actually partnering with Skole in this endeavor, because for us, this 100% has to be in Afrikaans. It needs to be. But at the moment, it's purely in English. And that's not the way we want it to be. And we know many dual medium schools, you'll be sitting there and saying, but now how do I offer it to some and not to others? So part of the question that we're wanting to ask after this, and you'll have a moment to kind of give an answer to a Zoom poll that Hugo will share in a few moments. And that is this something you'd be interested in? Because if there's sufficient interest out of the group that sits here and beyond, it then tells us, you know what, this is something we need to make sure is translated. You can imagine to translate this, it's a lot. It's 9 years worth of curriculum we're translating. And we just want to make sure that this is actually serving the schools in the best way possible. And so if you see this as a need for your school, please do say, hey, I'm interested in this. It gives us an indication that this is something to put forward. And so our goal would be over the next kind of 6 to 12 months, because if we can make it 6 months, even better, but 12 at most, that come late next year or early the following year, it's ready in Afrikaans, and we can go from there. So I see some of the things coming through in a moment. That's awesome. Hold on for the poll. Make sure you put it on there, and then it means that we also know to be in contact with you. And then how? Yes, Matt.
Grade 12.
And then grade 12. Yes, there was a question. So that's also another great question. We have focused up to this point to solve the first problem, and the first problem is backlogs up to the end of grade 9. We are now in the process of building out the FET phase components. It'll take a little bit of time, but we've actively, we've been very intentional about how we build it. And the first part that we're actually building is what we call grade 10 readiness. We've identified that there's a little bit of a gap between grade 9 and students being ready for grade 10. So we want to build that gap and make sure that, again, that full readiness of all the concepts that are needed, as you walk into grade 10 are sitting over there. So that's the first part. Then we're going to be building the FET phase component, which goes up to matric. And the last part, which again is the interesting bits, right, looping right back to the beginning of the presentation, is that there's also a gap between matric and first university. And we've actually identified that, and we're going to be building on that. So hopefully through reflective learning, a student can go right from, if you need to, right from grade 1 all the way up to grade 12 and beyond, and be ready. And then just want to double check, the last question is, well, 2 questions. How can you get signed up? Again, the poll that will come in a couple of minutes, if you want to just say, yes, I'm interested, it gives us the opportunity to come back to you, make sure that any details that are in there, I'm sure that we'll be able to connect with the Skole team to make that. And for us, like, what's really important as well is that this is a tool. We work with schools. We don't just say, well, we sign you up and then we'll see you in 12 months time. We work with you, and we want to see impact. So we guide you all the way through. You're never left alone. We love building relationships with schools. That's the heart behind what we do. So everything that we learn, we put back into building something better. We share with you so that you can see better outcomes and learning that takes place. And then Desiree has also said, let the Afrikaans teachers help you translate. 100%. We have to have maths teachers that help translate this. It's not going to a translation company or an app or anything like this. It has to be teachers that translate, because that's the only way it will make sense in terms of mathematics. And then the last one to hand over to Matt, and is just around the costs within this. It is a subscription model that we work with schools, but you'll be able to kind of share perhaps a little bit around that. But again, also thinking down the line, this is really meeting the needs of what often sits in the space of tutoring. And if you think around the thousands of rands that are spent on tutoring, there must be a better way to do this. And that's actually where we're sitting, is trying to kind of be a more cost-effective option to that. So maybe over to Matt quickly to answer that.
So in terms of costing, as Eugene says, comparing to what else would a parent need to do or a school need to do to fix this problem, we fit it in the sort of tutoring space, and so our cost as a starting point is 450 Rand per learner per year, which is a cost in most cases of maybe 1 or 2 extra lessons. And so you're getting a year's worth of content for that price. And then obviously that operates on a sliding scale. And so the more learners you add, the lower your per learner price becomes. And then we also have a sort of a lower per learner fee for the entire school to be added on. But best is to just be in touch with us. But the starting point is at 450 Rand per learner per year.
Yeah. So maybe over to Hugo. I'd love to.
Yeah. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Eugene. Dames en here, ek dink jy sal my saamstem dat hierdie was vandag 'n ander stem in terme van wat gedoen kan word vir kinders in wiskunde. En soos jy dit een en een kan by mekaar sit, hoekom doen ons hierdie webinar vandag saam met Reflective Learning? Hulle is die ouens wat reeds in Engels die program op hierdie plek het, dat dit reeds 'n verskil begin maak. Ons gaan nou na Greta luister om prakties te sien hoe dit reeds verskille maak. Maar ons gaan uiteraard wil ons vandag gebruik. En die Gene daarna verwys, ons gaan nou vir u opname gee waarin u kan deelneem, waarin u kan sê, stel u daarin belang, dink jy ons moet dit vertaal. En u gaan vandag moontlik die baanbrekers wees wat gaan sê, SOS en Reflective Learning gaan saamwerk om toe te sien dat ons vir ons Afrikaanse skole en kinders hierdie selfde program kan bied. Dit is die droom wat ons wil bereik. Eugene, shall we quickly listen to Greta before we go to the poll? I think that would be a good idea. Greta Langenhoven is sy's 'n wiskundewyseres by Paulus Gimnasium op Stellenbosch en sy is spesifiek getaak om hierdie projek te dryf, maar nie noodwendig in Paulus nie, in die landelike gemeenskap van Stellenbosch vir die arm gemeenskappe. En daar is reeds suksesse daar. So Greta, baie welkom daar van Stellenbosch af. Vertel ons gerus meer van die suksesse wat reeds behaal is met hierdie program.
Baie dankie. Ek dink ja, daar's seker 'n borrelende opgewondenheid in almal wat nou luister oor die moontlikhede wat daar in hierdie program lê. Net weer eens as mens dink aan 'n graad 8 klas waar dit onvermydelik is dat jy in 'n groter of 'n kleiner mate wel hierdie gapings het. Sit 'n mens nou nog daarby dat leerders van verskillende laerskole kom met verskillende wiskunde standaarde. En nou moet jy daai goue middeweg vind om die topleerder gemotiveerd en te kry dat jy sy aandag hou, maar hom ook op sy vlak kan verhoog. En in dieselfde tyd moet jy die leerder wat eintlik al opgegee het, ook nog kry om te wil leer. En hierdie program maak daai gaping tussen die leerders net soveel kleiner en makliker hanteerbaar vir jou. So ek is regtig opgewonde oor wat dit als vir onderwysers kan beteken, maar ook vir die leerders. Ek dink vir 'n topleerder sê ons partykeer, ag, dit was 'n agterlose fout. En ons besef dalk nie dat dit 'n gaping is wat hy, so klein gaping, maar dit is groot genoeg dat hy dan op die ou ende 'n fout maak. So ons kan daai topleerders help om nog hoër te gaan. Die onderste leerders kan weer moed skep. Hulle kan hierdeur besef dis nog nie te laat nie. Ek kan nog verbeter. Ek kan bybly in 'n klas en dalk selfs wil deelneem in 'n klas. So ons het eerstens nou 'n proefloopie by Paul Roos met 'n groep leerders waarmee ons nou nog nie te lank besig is nie, maar daar is die grootste positiewe vir my eintlik die ouers. Ek dink hulle raak so opgewonde om te besef hier is 'n middel wat nie net my kind se punt gaan verbeter nie, want dit is vir die ouers tog belangrik. So hulle is baie opgewonde oor die feit dat dit kan help om punte te verbeter, maar ek dink hulle sien ook in dat dit 'n leerder se selfdissipline, uithou vermoë so kan verbeter dat dit ook kan oorspoel na ander vakke toe. So vir die ouers ons kry baie goeie terugvoer dat hulle baie opgewonde is oor alles wat die program vir hulle kinders kan bied. En dan, soos jy nou genoem het, is ons besig met die projek waar ons ook vir Kaimandi, Makapula High in Kaimandi en ook Lukhof Hoërskool in buite Stellenbosch het ons reeds hulle leerders hierdie jaar ingeskryf. En daar kan 'n mens van die leerders se kant af sien, soos ek nou gesê het, daardie moed. Hulle het weer lus, hulle glo hulle kan verbeter. En baie van hulle het heeltemal opgegee tot nou toe. En nou sien hulle, hierdie is amper my individuele handboek wat my help om my gapings uit te sorteer sodat ek kan verstaan wat die onderwyser sê. So hulle is regtig, jy kan sien hulle is opgewonde om te verbeter. En van daardie onderwyser se kant af sien mense al 'n verligting. 'n Verligting want dis nie net ek wat hierdie verskriklike taak moet aanpak van al hierdie kinders in my klas op dieselfde vlak kry en dan bou op dit. So hulle het al 'n verligting wat sê dankie dat daar hulp is, dat ek kan in die klas help en ondersteun tydens hulle reflective learning sessies, maar ek moenie gaan en 40 kinders se gapings identifiseer, opbou en daarop bou nie. So daar's vir elke vlakpunt, elke tipe kind, elke agtergrondkind, sowel as onderwyser en skool, 'n plek in reflective learning vir hulle om op te bou. En ek moet net ook by sê, Eugene het genoem dat hulle hart is regtig in. Hulle het nie net 'n program en los hom daar nie. Hulle is konstant besig om nuwe idees en nuwe dele in te bring. Enige terugvoer wat mens gee, kan mens sien, neem hulle ter harte en probeer soveel as moontlik doen om hierdie program regtig waar iets te maak wat jy eintlik nie sonder kan op die ou einde nie.
Baie dankie Greta. Wat ook interessant is, ek dink ons is almal verras dat hierdie program is bekostigbaar.
Ja.
Dis baie beslis bekostigbaar en ons wil nie net die een kind help nie. Ek sien daar's ook weer 'n vraag, Eugene, can a single scholar go on this program? Like you said previously, the main plan is to work in cooperation with schools with us, sodat ons meer kinders kan help en nie net die individue nie. Is ek reg, Eugene?
Yeah, that's very right. So, I mean, from sometime in October, we will be opening up and releasing to families to effectively sign up for the individual children. But you know what gets lost along the way is if that's what happens, you as a teacher don't get to see the data that comes from your class. You don't get to actually be a part of the process. And we much prefer to connect parents to learners, to teachers, because then the whole education process happens far better. So even though we want to leave that option open to those that can, we prefer it all together with schools.
Yeah. Just to add to that, we also find that a lot of schools will start with a couple of their weaker learners, and when they start seeing the results, then all of a sudden they want the whole grade or the whole school to go on it. And so it's fine if you are tentative and you want to start with a few, or like what they've done at Paul Roos with just one class, but the results prove themselves, and then we open up to the rest of it. So all options are available.
En ek is so belangrik, Greta het verwys na die ouers. Ons kan hierdie program suksesvol doen sonder die ouers nie. En daar waar hulle dit gedoen het by Paul Roos en met individuele leerders, ook van ander skole, maak dit die ouers opgewonde. So Greta, dankie dat jy dit deel as 'n onderwyser is wat prakties in die klas staan, wat hierdie program gebruik, wat die verskille sien wat dit maak vir ons kinders. En ek sien ook so met jou opgewondenheid daarin. So baie dankie vir jou deelname vandag.
Ja, reg so.
Dames en here, gaan vir Maryke vra om gou-gou vir ons die poll oop te maak. So moet asseblief nie afklim nie. Ek wil nog 1 of 2 belangrike goedjies vir u gee. As u dit gou individueel daar kan voltooi. Die eerste vraag is, dink u hierdie reflective learning program is sinvol vir skole? U moet net ja en nee of onseker antwoord. Dan moet u vraag 2 antwoord vir watter grade van die skool sal vloeiend gaan 'n verskil maak. U kan daar aandui, dan nou of u seker laerskool of so. Ons wil net 'n indikasie kry na aanleiding van wat u gesien het en u stel belang watter grade. En dan wil ons vir u vra, dink jy Afrikaanse skole kan hierby baat? Aan die woorde ja, moet ons dit vertaal? Ons sal ons geïnteresseerd om dit te wil weet. En dan, ja, ek dink dit is die 4 vrae wat jy net vir ons moet doen. Ja, laaste vraag is, het die skool die nodige digitale infrastruktuur in plek om hierdie program te implementeer? Ander woorde, dit gaan meer uitdagend wees as daar absoluut geen internet en wifi is nie en geen toestelle is waar kind enigstens kan werk nie. Dan gaan dit by die skool uiteraard baie moeilik en uitdagend wees. Dankie vir die wat reeds geantwoord het. Ons waardeer, dankie dat jy al die dele daar antwoord. Lyk my ons het oor 'n breë spektrum die grade, die oorgroot 93% sê hulle stel belang. Grootste behoefte lyk my hier na graad 7 tot 9 toe, Eugene. En die mense sê Afrikaanse skole sal baat vind en die mense sê ons moet dit vertaal. Dis wat hierdie mense sê vandag en die meeste skole lyk my het die digitale infrastruktuur om hierdie ding te kan toepas. Dames en here, ek gaan die polls nog so 'n paar minute of wat kans gee om klaar te maak. Intussen terwyl u dit klaar maak, dames en here, u gaan eintlik 4 opsies hê na aanleiding van vandag se webinar. U kan die opsie verkies om te sê dit gaan nie vir my werk nie, ek stel nie belang nie, dis onmoontlik en tou opgooi. U kan die opsie kies van, okay goed, ons is nie in staat om hierdie program te kan doen nie, my skool gaan dit nie kan bekostig nie, maar ek as 'n juffrou vir meneer, ek gaan iets probeer doen. Ek het 'n paar dinge vandag raak gesien en ek gaan 'n paar verskille maak. Die derde ding wat u kan doen is, u kan betrokke raak by die SOS, die Solidariteit Skoleondersteuningsentrum en gaan sluit aan by Wolkskool. By Wolkskool het ons reeds 16.000 video's, werkkaarte en assesseringsinstrumente en die kind kan teruggaan en ou lesmateriaal en lesinhoude, kort 6 minute video's van onderwerpe in wiskunde wat hy of sy gemis het van vorige grade, kan hulle gaan doen. So individuele kinders kan nie by aansluit by Wolkskool teen R118 'n maand, of 'n skool kan met ons praat, dan is dit aansienlik goedkoper. En die 4de opsie is hierdie opsie met reflective learning. Wat ek dink 'n opwindende sessie is. Dankie vir u deelname daaraan vandag. Dames en here, ek wil ons hier herinner aan die volgende. Ons wil hier aan die volgende herinner dat ons het 'n opname gemaak hiervan. Hierdie opname is slegs beskikbaar aan ons lede van ons wiskundevereniging. Gaan sluit aan op skole.co.za, dan kan jy die opname weer en weer kyk. As jy 'n bywoningssertifikaat vir vanmiddag se opleiding wil hê, moet u gaan aansluit by die VAW by skole.co.za. As jy wil gaan kyk wanneer is daar verdere webinare, al die opleidingsgeleenthede sal verskyn op ons webwerf skole.co.za. Eugene, last few words from your side.
I mean, I think a massive thank you. A massive thank you for your time, for being interested, for the feedback on this. And our goal is ultimately to empower you as teachers to be able to deal with it. What is a really tricky problem. And we just so appreciate, I mean, literally, I'm genuinely saying it when I say, thank you for the input that you have put in over the last couple of years with COVID. It has been the most difficult period of teaching I think the country has seen. And I mean, we just hold our hands up and say, if there's any way that we can support you through this time, that is our ultimate goal and hope. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing all the questions. If you want to just find out more, you know, we'd love to be able to start a conversation and just walk the journey with you. We're very much believe in partnering, not in selling, if that makes sense. And so here we are. We're just saying, how can we come alongside you to help? And thank you to Skool and Hugo and Marika and Greta. Really, we so appreciate the opportunity to be working with amazing people. And yeah, thank you again for the time.
It's a big pleasure. Matthew, from your side?
Just echoing what Eugene said, you know, this is a really tough challenge and we can't do it without the hard work that the teachers are putting in. And so, you know, hats off to you guys. I miss the classroom, but not the admin. Yeah, it's amazing what you guys are doing. And so we're just here to support and do the best we can to help.
Maybe just one final question, Hugo, and that is, I mean, if they filled in the poll, will we be able to, I know there are a few people that have said that they'll be interested, will we be able to see some of the people and the contact details? I'm just conscious of people that maybe want to start a conversation.
Yes. So we will send an email before the end of this week to everybody that registered for today. Of course, some people registered, but because of other reasons, they won't be able to attend the webinar. If they weren't able, so we will send an email to them. We will give the result of the poll there, and we will contact Reflective Learning directly to share all the detailed contact details and results. Maar baie dankie, dames en here. Kom ons gaan maak 'n verskil. Kom ons gaan hou aan nie dink terwille vir ons kinders en vir ons voortbestaan, en ons sê dankie aan Reflective Learning, dat ons is dankbaar dat daar sulke mense is wat reeds die leiding hier rondom neem, en ons sien uit daarna vir 'n goeie vennootskap saam met Reflective Learning. Baie dankie, seën en sterkte daar by u skool.